everyone. Again, my name is Igor, and I'll be presenting JavaLite today. How you doing? All right. Who am I to tell you? Who am I to be here and for you to be there and to listen to what I say? Well, I have some experience building commercial software. I have some experience managing teams. I have some experience being managed by other people. I had a pretty massive teaching experience. I taught Java and Ruby on Rails at the DePaul University for over 10 years. I worked on large projects for well-known brands, specifically ExpressPigeon and Edovo. Those are tiny companies. And I write code every day, so maybe I have something to say. Here we gather here today to talk about yet another framework. So a couple of people came up and asked, what's JavaLite? Is it like a way of building? Is it a new language? So JavaLite is a cohesive set of frameworks that work together very well for building modern applications. That's what it is. So the question is, oh my God, not another framework. We already have the entire landscape littered by framework. So this slide is really outdated. I'm talking about the number of frameworks. We can probably add maybe 10, 15 more here, but it doesn't really change the picture. The point is, when people start building new systems, like, oh my God, there's so many different options out there. Spring Hibernate, that's it, Spring Hibernate, right? Or Spring Boot. In some cases, people start using a Play framework, which is actually a pretty decent framework. And so today we're going to be talking about JavaLite, which is a set of frameworks that will make your life so much easier compared to anything else that you have in Java. So what do you do in a new project? You find and integrate every piece of technology that you need for your project. So you need a database framework, you need a view framework, you need a login framework, you need database connection management framework, REST framework, all of that. So 2 weeks after, you're like, raise your hand is like, what's the project all about? I forgot, right? Because you're deep down in the weeds of technologies. So then, I should stop banging on this table. So the new project challenges are how to properly do TDD. Everybody's familiar with what TDD is, test-driven development, right? So write test first, and then, not necessarily you have to write tests first. I follow certain mantras, but I don't follow them 100%. So how to test HTML, XML, JSON? So typically in a standard Java project, you use some form of a framework that uses JSPs under the hood, say some sort of faces or struts or anything, or even free marker. The problem is you cannot execute generation.html, XML, JSON without a container, because all that logic is embedded in container. So that means that a large portion of the code is not tested. So a lot of Java developers say, oh, HTML is not Java, so I don't care if it's tested. And the problem is the customers don't care. If something doesn't work, something doesn't work. So why not test that as well? So other challenges, how to map URLs to code, how to make development go fast. Actually, I'm pretty sure, raise your hands with the people who write web applications in Java. All right, perfect. Are you familiar with this code package deploy start test cycle? You wait until the container starts up, then you test it, then you have to make a change in code, then you have to go through the same cycle. Now, sometimes it's fast, maybe a minute. Sometimes it's slow, because once you're up, you have to log in, then you have to go through the number of conditions. Finally, we navigate to the page that whose code you just changed, and you want to test that. So, in my personal experience, what brought me to JavaLite? In 2008, I led a project at Sears that had lots of issues. It had too many developers. It was built on Spring Hibernate. It had an end file size of over 3,000 lines of code, and there was no way to test web components. Obviously, doggedly slow development cycle. So everything was just slow. Just adding a page meant struts, XML, mapping this, mapping that. It was just terrible. No dopamine. So we're all engineers, right? Engineers become engineers because they want to be satisfied with the product of their work, right? So actually, I'm a software engineer today, but I used to be a hardware engineer. It's a lot easier to be a software engineer because you make an experiment, it works, you're like, yes, right? But in hardware, you draw an electronic schematic, then you hypothesize how it should work, then you build it, which will take weeks, right? Then you run experiments, it doesn't work, then you get back to a drawing board. So the cycle for getting dopamine is so much faster in software. But in Java, it's actually slower than anywhere else. The question is, what's wrong? So right at that time, Ruby was kind of gaining momentum. Ruby was quote-unquote cool. And the non-technical managers made a decision to switch the entire project to Ruby. Now, that was not a good business decision, but for us, the techies, who weren't exposed to Ruby on Rails, it was great, personally for me. Once I kind of learned Ruby on Rails and Ruby, I was kind of floored by the fact that, okay, language is very similar. You know, you read a syntax book in a book on Ruby, you learn it. There's nothing special. You know, a lot of people say, oh, Ruby is a completely different language. No, it's not. It's just another flavor of C, right? It's a C-based language. It's very similar. It's object-oriented. It's classes, yada, yada. So it has some constructs that are missing in Java and vice versa. So big deal. So I was waiting but Ruby on Rails, in my opinion, was kind of revolutionary because it contained everything for modern web application development. It contained a database layer. It contained database migration tools. It contained the views. It contained database management. Pretty much it contained everything you need to build a modern web application. You write a simple command line, generate a project, you have your hello world, off you go. It takes like a couple of minutes, right? And I thought, okay, we have to have something like that in Java because there's nothing in Java that precludes from having such framework. Well, I waited a year or two, and nothing showed up, and basically I rolled my sleeves and decided to build one. Right, so the JavaLite goals, fast time at the ground, just like Ruby on Rails, most everything you need aside from business logic. So oftentimes when you deal with technology, when I say technology, I mean when you're writing your business application, you spend a lot of time dealing with technology, like how to open a database connection, where to place it, how to manage transactions, where's configuration for test, staging, production, development, and so forth. So my idea was to take the best ideas and tools from the Ruby, best ideas and tools from Java, best methods of building things from Ruby on Rails, merge them together and call it JavaLite. Actually, JavaLite word or title came a few years later. So the idea was to bring the speed of development of Ruby on Rails into Java world. And in addition to that, also have the framework perform well so that no matter how fast you build, it's really important that the system is actually working in production fast as well. Okay? Make everything intuitive. Convention overrides configuration. That's another big thing in Ruby on Rails. If you know the conventions, and there aren't too many, you learn how to name this and that. If you name them the right way, they just find each other, right? Without having to configure, oh, this thing relates to that thing, okay? So the idea was to produce something that has almost no configuration. Of course, sometimes you cannot use conventions, and for that you can always override. So what is JavaLite? JavaLite is a cohesive set of frameworks that work and integrated well together, or can be used separate from one another, such that they allow you to build a modern web application that has just about every technology piece nicely, playing like friends with others. So the first one is active JDBC. So the model for active JDBC was active record, which is a similar ORM from Ruby on Rails. So the active word came from active record, and JDBC came from JDBC. And the idea is that active JDBC is a very thin veneer on top of JDBC. So a lot of people ask, is it on top of Hibernate? Is it the JPA? Is it something else? No. This thing is sitting right on top of JDBC. It's very flat, very thin. And it's written from scratch. Active Web is a full-stack web framework for rapid application development. I know you can read the slides, but what does it really mean? Right? For instance, if we take struts, everybody knows struts, right? More or less. What does struts do? Renders HTML, right? Can you do that during a test? No, right? So if you can't do it during a test, how good is it for me? Because I can't test the structure of my HTML, right? So it's kind of useless. That's why it's full stack, because ActiveWeb allows you to prototype your HTML or any other text generated or emitted from the framework at test time. JSpec is a natural language assertion tool. Basically, it replaces the assertions from JUnit. DB Migrator is a very simple tool that simply allows you to make changes to a database schema in such a way that you can understand and trace back to something. And AppConfig really is not a framework, it's a class, it's a one class. But it's super useful for configuring your application differently for different environments. Let's say the URL for X in development is this, but in production it's something else. Or for instance, the password for my database in development is this, but in production is that. Okay? Now, if anybody used Ruby on Rails, you know that Ruby on Rails uses its own command line tools. And the idea was, well, maybe I should build something like that, but then I kind of balked and thought, well, there's a pretty amazing piece of technology in Java called Maven. You know, why don't you use that? So the entire, not entire, but ActiveWeb is built on top of Maven. Without further ado, let's look at some code. So this is a, so let me see if I can get a pointer here. There you go. You guys see that? It's very cool. So let's create a table called people in a database. This example is for MySQL, but ActiveJDBC supports like 10 databases. And so we're adding a couple of columns, first name, last name, and so forth. And then we write, that's DDL, and then we execute that, we have a table, right? A table has 5 columns, no big deal. No big deal in the sense that it's really transparent. So in Java, you would write public class person extends model brace brace. Now there's no typo here. This is the entire class you have to write. There is no configuration, nothing. So there's some magic happening here. Number one, oh, by the way, as you can see, class person extends model. So ORM stands for object relational model, right? So I'm not sure why Hibernate chose the word entity, but in what is called in Hibernate, what is called entity in Hibernate is called model in ActiveJDBC. Now, there's some magic happening here. First of all, there are no setters and getters defined in my person class. Actually, nothing is defined in my person class. And my person class is not called the people, it's called the person. So ActiveJDBC, basically, it's one of the conventions. Basically, it says, if you have a set of records, which is a table, then that thing has to be plural. And if you have a model, then that, because it represents one record, it has to be singular in English. In addition to that, ActiveJDBC even knows how to work with English exceptions. So octopus, octopi, although Tyler recently corrected me that now octopus, plural of octopus is octopuses. But besides that, you can actually override this in 2 different ways. So how to use this? People where, this is another anathema to a Java developer. There is no session manager, right? A model is responsible for itself. Okay, basically say people where, and then we pass some SQL. That little snippet, first name equal question mark, is SQL. There's no other language to learn. If you know Java, you know SQL, you can use ActiveJDBC. Okay, and then you say get me a first person, and then from that first person, I'm going to get a last name. This last name is a dynamic getter. Basically, I have to pass a name of a column from a table. One other thing that's happening here, whenever you start a project, your system, when you first try to access a person class, the system's like, ooh, person, I know nothing about person. What's the corresponding table? People. Okay, I'm going to go to a schema, find a people table, pull down all the metadata about it, columns, their types, everything, and then I'm going to configure my model such that you cannot pass just any random attribute to it and say, oh, get me that. Okay? So on the bottom over here, you see, I'm sorry, there's a bad connection. Okay. On the bottom, you see a more advanced example, employee where department equals something and hire date greater than something else. And then you pass 2 dynamic parameters over here. sorry. And then you say .offset.limit order by. But by the way, in JavaLite, every time you don't know how something works, put a dot, control space, and see what's available. It's just chock full of fluent interfaces. Every public method is well documented in JavaDoc, so it'll be easy to understand what's going on here. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt. Go ahead.
Connection pooling, how we handle that?
I was expecting that. Okay. One person noticed that there's no connection management. This is a classic application. Can you guys see it, or I can make the font a bit bigger? Okay, editor, font 16. How about 26? What just happened? Editor font size 26. Interesting. Where's that? Ah. Okay, a little bigger. So this, as you can see, I have base.open and base.close. Now, base.open will open a connection and attach it to a current thread as thread local, and then every model that's called will just find a connection there, right? If you need multiple databases, you can attach multiple connections to the same thread, and then you can say this model belongs to that database, this model belongs to that database. It's all taken care of. Did that answer your question? Therefore, when you look at code, there's no connection management, no connection. I mean, obviously connection is there. It's still JDBC, right? But code is as clean as possible. Okay. Next, how to create new records. There's like 5 different ways to create new records. These are the most primitive ones. So for instance, you create a person, then you say set, save it. Anybody here familiar with Ruby on Rails? Okay, 3 people. So save it is equivalent to save that, okay? And save is equivalent to save. So basically, if the model isn't valid according to your rules that you set, that is, it doesn't have enough data, if you call save it, you're going to get a validation exception. If you call save, just save, you're going to get a return value saying, hey, something bad happened. Updating, employee find first, and then you pass some parameters, and then, I should stop clicking, set last name, that's saved. So the code is kind of self-explanatory, right? Easy to read. So the set method is actually pretty universal. You can pass an array of name value pairs in one shot and save them all. Questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So what if I need a join like between a person and a company?
It's a common question. If you need a join, you can use a freeform SQL. But if you need a join, you cannot get a list of models because a model represents only one table, right? So if you need a join, you can do things like this. How to get out of this presentation view? At the bottom. So you guys got me into it. You have to get me out.
Try escape.
Escape is not working. That's the first thing I tried.
Go to the top.
So anyway, so you would say something like this: base find all, and pass your whatever, and then select whatever whatever is your fancy list map. That's what you would write for a very complex query. So basically, you're dropping down from the model level down one level of the API, and you get just a list of maps. Now, each map will have columns that you select and the results. So it's actually pretty easy to build pretty complex queries. And then since you have a list of maps, you can easily throw them in a view and have them display. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but can we cast it into a DTO of some kind, like the result, or does it have to be like that?
Okay, can we cast it into a DTO? You cannot cast it because it's a list of maps, right? So generally, JavaLite projects do not have DTOs because the model itself is a DTO. So if we look at the person, we have nothing interesting here. Person, a constructor, empty constructor, and another constructor that sets the name. So the model itself, the instance of a model itself, behaves almost like a map. You can get stuff from it, you can put stuff into it, you can drop them on the page, and they will render properly. So models themselves are DTOs. Also, they're just POJOs. Models are not attached to anything. There's no stale session or anything. None of that stuff exists in Active JDBC. So a model is a glorified map with some intelligence about it. That's it.
And you should, so I quote with the framework a lot. He has an include handle that you can throw on a where query that gives you the associated results. If it's like a parent or a child, it'll prefetch everything.
Right. Right. So this just, Mike is right. Basically, the framework is very mature. Active JDBC came out in 2010. Over time, it got added lots of interesting functionality. It supports just about anything. I think I have a slide for that. So JavaScript, no query language. It supports multiple types of relationships, one-to-many, many-to-many, polymorphic associations. Supports English inflections, runtime discovery, validations, internalization, logging. Just so much that whatever you need to build for a modern project, it does have as an ORM layer. It's not dependent on Active Web. If you just want to use Active JDBC in a non-JavaLite project, go ahead. Okay. So by contrast, Active Record from Ruby on Rails is tightly bound to the web part, so it's really hard to pull it out. It is possible, but it wasn't designed for it. I'm going to be corrected now. All right, Active JDBC demo. So now that we're in this demo, let's look at this, at the demo. So let's look at the person class. First of all, let me get out of this view, exit presentation mode. Okay. Is it too small? Okay. So all of these examples are online, and they have their README pages. So a couple of other things. Are you guys familiar with the notion of a migration? What is a migration? No, like a database migration. I'm not asking those three guys. Flyway? Yes, like Flyway. Yeah, Flyway is a migration tool, and but a pretty complicated tool in my opinion. So apologies. JavaLite provides a migration system. Projects, simple, what was it called? Simple example. JavaLite. Simple example. So I'll explain what that means. Let's say if you have a file called database.properties here, then the migration system and Active JDBC will be sourcing a set of connection properties from this file. You can put 4 parameters here or a GIND if you're opening a connection from a pool. So here, JavaLite also supports the notion of an environment, something that idea was popularized by Ruby on Rails. The idea is that your program is running in different environments, right? It's running in development, it's running in production, it's running in staging, it's running God knows where, right? All those environments have names, and you might as well just configure your system for different environments. So there's a pretty good system of configuration for different environments built into JavaLite. So in here we say, because if you don't specify which environment you're running, it assumes development. So this is going to be used. Now, you guys familiar with Maven? Migration. So there's a migration plugin over here from JavaLite, that will be looking at the database properties and will default to looking at this migrations directory. Okay, so in here I have movies, people, and movies, people, 3 tables. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to look at my cheat sheet, right, and basically say I'm going to invoke my migrator, which will drop the database. Because I have a migration system and I have migrations, I'm not afraid to do these things. Right? I can just execute another command and bring my database back, which is cool. So drop database such and such, and also drop database movies test. Now, JavaLite suggests, actually has a framework for using 2 databases locally. One for running your program and one for running your tests. Okay? Because if you run a test against a database where you're, against which you're running a live program on your development environment, you'll be trashing your data. Okay? So, and then I'm going to create a new database. And now I'm going to migrate a database. So the migrator found this file and ran this file against my database. No big deal, no magic, right? So if I want another migration, let's say add let's say a column to my table, I'll just use a migrator to create a new file. I will manually add SQL to it, and then I'm going to run my migrator. And so the nice thing about it, think about it this way. Now I have my migration, I have a second file, and I commit my changes into Git repositories, whatever. And then another developer comes in, he pulls, he runs the build. During the build, the migrator gets triggered, and then that person also has all the changes from your database. Isn't that cool? I did not invent it, I just wrote it to the migrator. Okay. So the next step will be migrate, npm clean install. You know how that works, right? It's running the test. And the next one will be build my dependencies. And while it's doing that, I'm going to execute this, my main program, the one that you saw. So all it does, it prints down to records. Let's see why it's doing that. Where is it? Main. Okay. So it creates a person, and then it saves that person, and then it adds 2 movies to that person, right? And then it says director get all movies, and for each just print out to a standard output. Okay. So the program is really trivial, doesn't really do much, but it shows like a lot. How much code? No, this is a one-to-many relation. Sorry, this is a many-to-many relationship. Let's actually explore. I'm going to add one parameter here. There's jdbc.log. And now look at the magic of JavaLite. First of all, it registered all these models. Then it went into a database, interrogated the schema, and found out that they're actually related. How are they related? Because their columns are named a certain way. So for instance, if I have a parent, say user, and I have a child address, and say user has many addresses, then that will manifest in a column in the child table called user_ID. If that column is found, then hey, we established a relationship, one-to-many. Okay, same thing here. So this is an ERD diagram. Anybody familiar with Crowfoot diagram? So movies people belongs to movie. Okay, movie has many movies people. Movie in person, many to many, through join movies people, and so forth. So when you start up, if you say, oh, print me information, it's going to print this ERD every time dynamically. And then dynamically, it's going to configure itself. So for instance, I can add a movie to a person, but I cannot add something else to a person because potentially there's no relationship. Any questions so far? Go ahead.
Is there a way for me to force, or just
Well, single plural relationship. No, it's a good question. Say active record has a notion of one-to-one, right? There's no such thing as active JDBC. I just haven't found how you would enforce it in the database itself, right? One-to-many, yes, I can create a foreign key, right, and put a constraint in it. But one-to-one, I have no idea how to do that in the database itself. So I chose not to implement it because it's superficial.
What's the naming convention for like movies people? I get how you did people person, but like I don't get the naming convention of how you're mapping movies people to the table.
In a very straightforward way, by adding annotation here. But I think I messed up something here because for the most part you don't need to add those annotations, including for joint tables for many-to-many relationships. Tyler, did you have a question?
Well, I was interpreting your question as can you override the table that backs a model?
Well, that too. Yeah. But I'm more like was thinking about some kind of business abbreviation that's absolutely made up and doesn't necessarily have a easy to describe plural form.
Well, yeah, I mean, but you don't have to use a plural form. You can just set the table name, right?
Okay.
Yeah, you can set the table name anytime. So when do people set tables? Whenever they use active JDBC against existing established schema, which was not named according to. Active JDBC probably has like 6, 7 different, or maybe more annotations to override just about anything. What the join table is, what the names of foreign keys are, everything. Actually, somebody submitted a pull request just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago with yet another annotation to override their stuff. So annotations exist. You can override just about anything. Did Tyler answer your question? Thank you. Okay, back to so JSpec. Let's look at the slide. So JSpec is a very simple annotation mechanism. So here, basically, we say if we have a calculator and we add 2 plus 2, this is a JUnit test, and then we say assert equals C result, comma 4. Now this is not readable. Assert equals is just against my personal nature. So JSpec allows you to write something that reads like an English sentence. AC result should be equal 4. Now, JSpec is more than just the language. It has a vast number of APIs that allow you to test different things. And also the output of it is far more friendlier. Basically, you compare an object, let's say a person in a string, right? In JUnit, you can't even do that because they won't compile. But in JSpec, they will compile, but it'll tell you that I can't compare these things because there are different types, right? Or if you compare, let's say, 3 long and 3 integer, JUnit will not compile. JSpec will compile and will succeed because ultimately that's what you want. Okay, but of course there's also an API in JSpec to enforce that the typing system. So active web. Now I kept on saying that active web is full stack. Wait a second. Let's go back to JSpec. So now that you've seen the model person over here, let's look at a test. Movie, okay. Let's look at movie here, a movie model. Movie model is pretty straightforward, but it does have this statement, validate presence of title and year. This means that we're telling the framework that this model is not valid if it doesn't have 2 attributes set with values, title and year, okay? So in other words, probably I have my not null assertion in the database, so I won't be able to save anyway. So if you have a model that has no title or year or both, and you try to save, you're going to get a validation exception. So the code looks like this. Should validate movie attributes. Now, we also took this idea of tests starting with the word should instead of test, because I'm not testing things. I'm validating my expectation. Okay? Something should happen here. You would think it's a little thing, but after maybe a couple of weeks of using this method, you will start thinking differently. You will start thinking in terms of business requirements, not in terms of technical something matching something else. So I'm creating a movie, and then I'm saying the movie should not be valid because it has no title or end year, right? Now, there should not be expects a name of a Boolean method. So it's very simple. Basically, it uses a reflection to find that method, executes that method, and checks that everything's fine. And then the second method, the movie is valid, should be false, is an equivalent to the one above it. But it was added for to kind of show you what you can do. And then I set the title and year, and then I say the movie should be valid. That's my test. Okay. So the style of testing is quite different. Go ahead.
Do you provide any type of mocking framework?
No. You can use any mocking framework. What you're looking at here is JUnit, tried and true JUnit. The only thing that's replaced, the language of the test method and the language of the assertion. So I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel. I'm just trying to push that wheel in a slightly different direction. Downhill, not uphill. Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah, all right. So moving forward, Active Web is full stack. So it's got everything. And it's nicely integrated with Active JDBC. One interesting feature of Active Web, it compiles code on the fly. Now, it does not compile all code on the fly. Excuse me, it compiles some code on the fly, which allows you to quickly experiment with things. So, let me switch into a demo mode, live coding session. Active Web Simple, look at that. I am going to simply start my container and start coding. And I'll talk through. Active Web Simple. Like any self-respecting Java web project, it uses JT plugin to bootstrap itself. Now, Active Web has no magic. It has some magic, but basically it's a serverless-based framework, which means that all APIs that you see eventually boil down to a serverless API. They get translated. But the serverless API is not exposed to you. Localhost 8080. This is my simple example. So first, let's iJog. I'll just type iJog. Oh, I have some code in there. That's no good. But because it's JavaLite, I can do these things. Okay, I know what happened. I need to rebuild project. Once the class file is in there, it's there. It just works. Okay. Run. Okay. Type iJog. It says what? 404 resource not found. iJog controller. Class not found exception. All right. It's kind of suggesting what I should do. I'm going to add a controller. Everybody knows what a controller is, right? Who doesn't know what a controller is in a web application? Okay, great. So I'm going to refresh the page. Remember, I just I just created a new class and it picked it up. So iJog controller is not the expected type. Are you sure it extends app controller? It doesn't, so I'll just add it. Extends app controller, import class, refresh. Now it says it's complaining about index. Now it defaults to an index method because I didn't provide any other. If I say /hello, now I get iJog controller.hello. So I'm going to go and add the index method. Methods that trigger on behalf of web requests are called actions. Void index. Okay. And now it says, let me just remove hello from here. By the way, I can make this bigger. And now it says failed to render template, and the template is /ijog/index.ftl. I'm going to go and add one here on the web app, webinf views. So the name of my controller becomes a directory here. Okay, and the name of my view corresponds directly to the name of my action. Index.ftl. Okay, and this one doesn't say anything. Okay, refresh. Hello, iJog. Now, in like a minute, what did I do? I added a new controller, I modified its code, I added a new view, I put some static data in it, nothing exciting, but try that with your grandfather's Java framework, right? Don't forget that Java is still a statically compiled language. So what the application does here is it is compiling the controller class on the fly each time you refresh the page. It does not do it in production, trust me, only in development. Okay? Now, let's put in some dynamic values. Message, hello. Here, I'm going to go into my controller, message. Now, what I'm doing here, I'm passing an object that I sourced from a parameter. The name of the parameter is message, and the name of the value inside my view is also message, or I can call it MSG to eliminate confusion. In here, I say MSG, right? And the message is hello. Aloha. So now we just built an entire a little web application without much fuss. Any questions so far? All right. Moving forward, let's write a test for that same thing. Normally, you would write a test before if you're practicing real TDD, but hey, it's a presentation. So I'm going to go into test Java app controllers and write an interesting class. iJog controller spec. And this thing will inherit controller spec. Now, it's still JUnit. How do I know that? Because I'm adding a JUnit test annotation. Public void should print hello message. And here I'll just say request get index and get me response content. So what happens here? First of all, okay, misspelled controller spec. First of all, it's going to execute iJog controller because my test class is called iJog controller spec. Okay, that's another convention. Then it's going to generate a request type of get. It will simulate HTTP get to my controller and will execute the index method or index action. And then I'm going to get a response content. And of course, when I run this, I'm going to get HTML. But HTML will also include haha. So I'm getting an exception because I didn't pass the message, right? And I'm using free marker here, which is totally unforgiving. So I'm going to add a parameter here. Parameter MSG aloha. Okay. What's wrong? Too many parameters. Is it good? All right. I'm going to execute it now, and it's going to blow up again. MSG.
Your param is message. You renamed it to MSG in view.
My param is message?
Yeah, it's MSG.
It's MSG over here.
No, but look at the controller. The controller is looking for the message parent.
MDS.
No.
Oh,
Look at your actual controller.
MSG.
Param.
No,
Param.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yes, thank you. So, right. All right. Now it printed hello jug, and the message is aloha. So what I can do here, I can make an assertion here. The response content should contain aloha. How about that? I just wrote an end-to-end piece of web functionality without much fuss. I tested it live. I wrote a test. The test, you can imagine, you can write a test that actually will check the structure of your HTML if you want. You can even do it in JavaLite by using jQuery style-like annotations. Okay, so if you're familiar with that, if you're a web developer, it would be pretty easy. But so I built an end-to-end, a little application here. Any questions? All right, moving forward. All right, active web. Uh-oh. It takes a sweet time to load. There you go. Okay, what else is interesting here? There's just so much to cover in a very short period of time. So active web demo, we did that. HTTP client. So oftentimes, so server side aside, right? You also quite often need to build an end-to-end application. So an HTTP client is pretty a convenient thing to do to have. So let me build one from scratch on the fly. Test. I'm just using JUnit to start. HTTP get yahoo.com text. Okay. Okay, I'm going to execute this code, run test, and it's printing some redirect. Interesting. Okay, so let's get headers. Aha, it's redirecting somewhere. Oh, it's redirecting here. HTTPS www. I guess Yahoo got stuck in the 90s. No, seriously, www. Okay. Okay, we're printing headers. Text. Not sure why laptop is getting slower. Maybe a network issue. But it's coming. There you go. Or maybe it's Yahoo. Who knows? So as you can see, you're just getting an HTTP request built with one line of code, as it's supposed to be. So the next one, Java async. This one is pretty interesting. Anybody here familiar with JMS, Java Messaging Service? Really? How do you process asynchronous jobs? Like,
RabbitMQ.
huh?
We use RabbitMQ.
Okay. Is it JMS based or not? No? Okay. So JMS is kind of like, JMS for messaging is the same as JDBC for databases in Java. There is a number of brokers out there where you can throw a message and it does something, and it gets delivered. So async is kind of like a command pattern framework on top of it, which allows you to build executable units and then throw them into a queue, and they are guaranteed to be delivered and executed. So where to find JavaLite? We're kind of getting close to the end. I can probably throw this online somewhere, but you know how to find me. I wanted to bring Tyler here before he sits down. So let me introduce Tyler. Tyler is CTO of a company called Edovo. So Edovo is a company where I led the initial project of building their enterprise system made up of about 5 applications, all on top of JavaLite, as a consultant with a small team for a couple of years, and then I brought Tyler aboard, who's a CTO. Tyler's been there for about a year and a half.
Year and a half, yeah.
Year and a half. So Tyler and a couple of guys over there, Mike and Shane, have had experience of not being exposed to JavaLite until they came to Edovo, and I want Tyler to speak a few words.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been, around a lot of different languages and frameworks. I started my career in Java and did Java web development and other things for about 5-6 years. Then I spent another 5 or 6 years working almost exclusively in Ruby on Rails. Was pretty early at the Groupon engineering team and got to see Ruby on Rails scale to astronomical heights and all of the trials and tribulations that go along with that. And I've been really happy to be back in Java land, but with a lightweight set of frameworks and tools that kind of gives me the best of both worlds. Ruby on Rails was fantastic because it's so flexible and it's so fast to just build things and get it up off the ground. It does certainly cost a lot more to run a Ruby application at scale because computationally the language is just so expensive. And JavaLite gives us a lot of that flexibility and ease in building applications as a small startup needing to get product out there really fast, but really not having to worry so much or as quickly about having to dramatically scale out the app tier with traffic load, right? So in our business, we provide a tablet-based education product to the incarcerated, which means we have about 10,000 Android devices out in the field that run a modified version of Chrome with our app inside of it. And we don't have very easy access to those devices. So us getting telemetry back is incredibly valuable and important. Anything that lets us troubleshoot without having to go on site, which is a huge pain considering these are correctional facilities, is a big boon to us as the organization. So we made a change pretty early on in me joining the team where we started pushing back from the browser all the JavaScript errors and a lot of the other client-side events that we could get to the server. And that added a dramatic amount of load to the back end that hadn't existed previously. I know for sure if this had been a Rails app, we would have been doubling or tripling our server stack. But because we're running on a very lightweight, very fast framework on top of the JVM, we didn't have to do anything. It just soaked it up, and our app tier is just fine. So we like it a lot. I'm still a big fan of Ruby, and I use it for a lot of things, usually for scripting and doing small one-off tasks. But I'm also a huge fan of Java, especially the modern Java with 8 and 9 and the stuff that's coming in 10, and plus these lightweight frameworks like Igor's built really makes it I think a fantastic ecosystem for building the next generation of tech startups. And if you have any more questions about the platform or how we're using it or the company, I'm going to be sticking around, so feel free to swing by and ask.
Tyler's very modest about himself. He had experience prior to Java. At the tender age of 25, he already had 10 years of experience building software. So he's one of those kids who was bused into a special school by a special bus. So
it was a short bus, though. So.
All right. All right, guys. Any other questions for me, for Tyler? We'll stick around. If not, thank you all for coming, and hopefully you'll take a look at. Now, as far as popularity, obviously JavaLite isn't as popular because I'm not doing anything other than having it out there. So oftentimes people who Google Active Record in Java, those are like Rails escapees into Java. They Google I can't handle Hibernate. I need something lightweight, and they find it. Nonetheless, the framework is getting about 20 to 30,000 downloads a month, and it's visibly growing. So if you have no more questions.
So how does this integrate with like the front-end frameworks?
How does it integrate with front-end frameworks? Beautifully. Not in any other way than anything else. So you write your JavaScript, you hit your backend controller. The integration is the same. I mean, there's no integration other than you call some method from some data from a controller. The difference is controllers are recompiled on the fly. So you can experiment with JavaScript code or Java code without having to shut down your application, which is a pretty considerable improvement to your productivity, the amount of dopamine that you get as an engineer. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, personally I don't like working with free marker templates and all that.
Do you mean, like we say front-end frameworks, you mean like a React or
Correct,
something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Angular, React, Vue, any of those.
Yeah. We don't, actually our front end's React, and most of our controllers that work with the React front end pieces, they just spit out JSON and we don't have FTLs for them at all. And we just generate JSON in the controller and push that back out.
Okay.
Yeah, you can just generate JSON from the controller, or you can use FreeMarker to generate JSON, which I personally prefer. I will explain why.
Sure.
Let me give you a very simple example. Active Web REST, it's also on GitHub. So here how it works. Controllers, people controller. Now a people controller index method has this interesting method. Person find all include address order by ID. Now this is a one-to-many relationship where every person can have any number of addresses, right? So, and then it gets thrown into a view called index, right? Let's take a look at that view. Web app, webinf, views. This is a people controller, so people directory. The index here does a very interesting thing. Render partial person, so it renders a partial, which is underscore person FTL. And it takes the collection called people. Now if you look at the person, so basically what this is an iterator. It's a loop that will iterate through your collection. And for each element in the loop, it's going to execute this partial, which will say ID, person ID, where person, the name of this object is the same as the name of the partial, which is another convention. Now for addresses, it goes into get addresses from that person and calls another collection, another partial address, okay, which is this one. So if you generate JSON from Java using Jackson or some other library, that's what you're going to get. If you use FreeMarker with nested partial templates, then you have a complete freedom how you want to structure, order, or have your XML or JSON look. Does that help? Now, this could be a backend for your Angular, React, or some other front end, or an endpoint for a REST API. And I can show you how this works. So let me run it. Port 8080. Okay, click here to see JSON with people. There you go. Jackson also has an interesting feature. See this compressed single line true? Well, let me show you how that works. Curl. I get my JSON, right? The same that was rendered in the browser. But if I remove this line, then I get exactly how I typed it into my template. Okay. You can also do conditional compression based on in which environment you're running. So if you're running in the development environment, you want to be able to read your JSON. So there's just so much more you can do with FreeMarker versus generating, from scratch. Does that help? FreeMarker is a pretty powerful framework for rendering UI. Actually, I had a similar reaction to begin with because it's unforgiving. If you stick a null in it, it's going to blow up in your face, right? But after a few weeks, I started to appreciate that. Okay, it's telling me where I went wrong. There cannot be any nulls in there, right? I should explicitly say if it's null, then replace it with empty string or something. But yeah, so the applications built with FreeMarker are more reliable in general compared to JSPs.
JSON and XML are your only serialization options?
No, you can type anything you want here. It's just text. FreeMarker emits text. So if we go back to another example, open recent active web simple. This one has multiple ways to display the same thing. It's a little CRUD application with services. Okay. Let me start the container. I should stop touching that cable. I apologize. I'm not sure what happened.
There it goes.
Okay, so this one started. It's a little CRUD application that allows you to add, delete books, but then there's a books in XML and books in JSON. Let's see how the controller is made. Books controller. If XML equals format, then render no layout content type. Basically, I'm saying content type is text XML. If it's JSON, it's application JSON. Otherwise, it's just HTML. Now, this in turn will open up different views depending on which extension you added. Books. See, index.jsonftl or index.xmlftl or index.whatever you want FTL. CSV, it doesn't really matter.
So if I have like protocol buffers or something, I just add.
This is not protocol buffer. There's no upfront compilation or anything. This is just FreeMarker doing its thing. FreeMarker is not averse to generate. FreeMarker can generate any text-based format. So protobufs is binary, right? But this is just text. So you can generate text in, you can generate XSL, you can generate CSV, you can generate whatever you want.
But you can respond with that in the controller, right? If you choose.
You totally can. Like for instance, if I go to my controller and here I'm wiping out everything and just say respond hello, right? This will be directly thrown back into my browser, hello, with nothing, right? And then I can say, content type, text, plain, right? Same thing. So you can generate whatever you want from a FreeMarker template, or directly, if you have a string that you want to drop on the, and I think that Mike is mostly doing that. He generates JSON from using Jackson from objects and just directly throws it out without having any templates.
Much to Igor's chagrin.
Yeah, I saw it like.
ActiveJDBC provides you with a list.toMaps, so you can just grab all your models and say to the maps, and it just spits out your maps.
Oh, actually, it also does to JSON.
Yeah.
Like directly from models, you can say person dot to JSON, just drop it in. Actually, let me do it just that. So here I'll just say respond books all. to JSON. Here it says pretty, false, and attributes. No, if you don't specify which attributes, it'll just include all attributes. Okay. So I'm deleting all code. There you go. So there's just so many ways to skin a cat. So we're running it with no views right now. If you don't believe me, I'll just say.
I believe.
Go back to hello. There you go. So every time you make a change in the controller and you refresh the page, the controller gets recompiled, reloaded, and executed. All right. Go ahead.
How do you do the security?
How do you do the security? Like what kind of security?
Login.
Login. There's in many different ways. The security is not built into the framework, but the framework has capability to add it in if you like, pretty easily. There's an example on in GitHub of a secure framework. Somebody also added this question, so I quickly threw together an app. So Active Web Secure. What it does, so Active Web also has a mechanism for filters. A filter is kind of like a servlet filter, only a little bit more advanced. It's a controller filter. Basically, it has before, after, and an exception method. So if you build your filter, you can attach that filter to a controller or a bunch of controllers and say, this before method gets executed before the controller has a chance to respond, right? So that's how it was implemented here. So if I go into Java app, controllers, actually Active Web Secure. Let me open it up in IDEA. Open. Interesting. It sends me in a different direction. Projects, JavaLite, Active Web Secure. Okay, this one. Terminate. So first of all, let's run it and see how it works. Plugins. I haven't run it in a while. Hopefully it just starts up. It doesn't. Probably having to do with dependencies. Oh, there you go. Active Web version 2.0. All right. Start. Plugin failed. So it needs some fixing. It's probably outdated. But the idea, fixing dependencies. The idea is that I have a controller and I have an authorization filter. I also have a protected annotation. I just decided to create an annotation called protected, right? The authorization filter does the following. If controller not protected, return. If controller protected and user session exists, everything's good. So controller protected method simply gets the current route. From there, it gets a controller. From the controller, it gets class, gets annotation protected, and sees if it's not null. So if a controller has that annotation, then it's protected. So the session has to have a user in it. Otherwise, it simply redirects the login controller. Does that help? And then I can go into, let's say, public controller. Public controller extends app controller, and a secure controller has this protection annotated. There are so many ways to do it. This is like the most primitive. I need to fix this example. I did not expect that question. I should have checked this example still. But does that answer your question? In the Edovo application, for instance, there is a protected controller which is used as a superclass and not as a notation like this. So the filter checks if controller is protected and there is no user in the session redirect to a login page. End of story. So it's literally 2-3 lines of code, and that's it. Having built commercial applications in about 10 in JavaLite for the past 10 years, I think I have a question for just about any scenario, hopefully. Any more questions? No? Well, then, oh, go ahead.
What made you choose this versus like Spring Boot?
Say it again.
What made you choose this one versus Spring Boot or some other framework?
Oh, Spring Boot did not exist. It was a very easy choice. There was nothing that existed that allowed you this speed of development and this number of tools for putting things together. And also, there was like a number of factors that pushed me into building JavaLite. One of them was months-long arguments with Ruby developers about how bad Java is, and so I wanted to improve it. All right, guys. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for spending your time after work. Everybody's tired, but thank you for sticking around.